So I am Una Metz and LICSW and author of Unhitched, the Essential Divorce Guide for Women.
And when's the book coming out?
It's coming out January 13th.
Oh, that's exciting. And you gave me a bunch of initials after your name. What do they mean?
Yes, licensed independent clinical social worker.
Okay. And this is a personal question. I love the name Una.
Oh,
What's it from?
thank you, thank you. It's actually a Gaelic name, and I'm not Irish, but apparently it's a very common name in Ireland.
Uh-huh.
So, kind of an unusual name here.
Did your mom give it to you or your parents
She
give it
did.
to you?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so okay, I just to recap, the book I'm working on is talking about living arrangements people are making. A lot of people want to make live apart together relationships, and they might come into some issues when I guess it's too close for comfort for their ex. Like if they're getting spousal support or some kind of support, but they're in a committed romantic partnership. And in the case I told you about, the woman built a duplex with her romantic partner. They were not married. They did not share any expenses. They could document everything. And yet her spousal support was pulled because they could prove, or her ex-husband could prove they were in a interdependent relationship, emotional relationship. So it's troubling, yes, from a legal level. But more importantly, or I guess more broadly, I wanted to talk with you about, I guess, what's going on through the minds of what's going on in our heads when we're coming up with these spousal support agreements or these spousal agreements, these divorce agreements, whatever they're called.
Uh-huh.
What in your practice have you seen any trends about? I don't know whether we're hurrying through them or we're not thinking about them enough, or
Well, I'll tell you what I see. And for the last 15 years, I've run 3 weekly divorce support groups. So I've literally seen hundreds of women through the divorce process.
oh,
And I think what I'm seeing is two things. One thing is sometimes the case drags on for such a long time that women can get fatigued. And, I've been doing this for 2.5 years. I just need to get this signed and get it done with. And so sometimes they agree to things at the very end that they wouldn't have necessarily agreed to in the beginning, because they're just fatigued with being in the process for such a long time.
and some of the agreements, are they usually financially related?
Yes, yep, either financial or custody related. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And are there any, I guess, tips for how not to have this fatigue? Well, first of all, let's talk about, is it difficult in your experience to have women not be able to sort of project into the future, to sort of create the document now that will help them live in the
Right.
future?
Right. Well, that was the second thing that I was going to say, is that the other way that I see this happening is that sometimes it is very hard to predict into the future. So, for instance, this comes up when people are getting divorced and they have very young kids and they can't quite imagine what the expenses are going to be, what kind of expenses will be shared expenses, when they have a 2-year-old, and like, what are the kids going to need at 16? So that can be one thing that's hard to predict. And then I also think sometimes women, when they're just finishing a divorce, some women think like, I never want to date again. I am never going to, be in a relationship again. And I always say to them at that point, like, that's a totally valid feeling for you to have right now. Please don't predict your future, you know. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. And maybe that is the case, which is totally fine. And maybe it's not. But we don't need to predict the future right now. We don't need to determine that you're never going to date. And so I think that sometimes happens. I see that happening, is that they kind of think, well, this doesn't really matter because I don't have any interest in dating anyway. And then, a few years later or a decade later, they have a lot of interest. And then they can be really impacted by those agreements that they signed when they were getting divorced.
I've heard of some cases where divorce agreements are reopened. Have you heard of that in where you are in Massachusetts?
Not the whole agreement. Mostly I've just heard about maybe child support being renegotiated, but I don't see it a lot with the whole agreement.
Okay, so like a spousal support thing, or that's not
Yeah.
your experience? Okay.
Occasionally spousal support, but
Okay. And what kind of regrets have you heard that women have about the agreements they enter into? Or have you heard any regrets?
I think most of the regrets have really been about that level of fatigue where they get to the point where they think I just want it to be over, rather than I want to really fight for what's fair. And I think that's one of the things that we really talk about in the support group, and one of the things that the support group really helps to prevent is for them to be making decisions that go against their well-being,
Right.
basically.
Right.
Because there is, in the support group, I'm the facilitator, so I've helped so many women through the process, so I know a little bit about the process. I know a lot about the process. And then the other women there too are going through it, and they all share tips with each other too. It's a tricky thing where do you advocate for yourself and kind of stand up for yourself, and when is that too much, right?
Right.
When is it really the time to let go, right?
Okay, when is the time? Okay, can you answer that question?
Oh, it's so individual, right? It's so individual. But I remember I had one case one time where, not going to divulge any names or identifying information or anything, but I
Sure.
had one case where they were really stuck. And she kept bringing up every week, we're really stuck. We can't come to agreement. We're really stuck. And these were people who had quite a bit of resources, a lot of resources. And so I finally said, can you tell me exactly where you're stuck? Like, what's the point at which you're stuck? She said, they had adult children. She said, we can't decide who should pay for the car inspection for the adult children. It's cars. And I was like, I'll pay for the car inspection.
Yeah.
That's a level of holding on. That's a level of being unable to let go. I think of that in that particular case, the divorce was not her choice. And it represented something that was was too hard to let go of.
Right. Right.
But it wasn't really about the car inspections, because they spent, a gazillion times more on lawyer fees than they would on the car inspections.
Right.
Just to debate that point, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's individual for everybody, and that's one of the things we talk about a lot in the group, is like, what is the value here? It's torturing you to stay in the divorce process, right? It feels so hard and so stressful, and so you want to finish it up, right? And yet, it's also really important to think about your future, especially your financial future. So you don't want to just let go of something that's going to be a big impact financially.
Right.
I mean, a lot of the work that I do with women is to help them advocate for themselves in a way that they have never done in a marriage, or
Well,
they've never done as much in a marriage.
Yeah, I was going to say, I personally, and I've talked to other women who have been divorced, there's some guilt. There's some guilt involved, like feeling guilty or being made to feel guilty if your primary contribution to the household was raising the kids and running the family.
That's
and there's
right.
no financial, there's no monetary
Right.
figure attached to that. And so we might feel, when it's time to divide things, we might not feel like we deserve the amount, or we're made to feel that way.
That's right. That's right. And that's a lot of the work that I do too in the groups, is really helping people to understand that they had an agreement when they were married. And the agreement went that one person was working and one person was supporting the person who was working, right? It's not
Right.
that the other person was lying around eating bonbons all day. right? The other person who was taking care of the home and the kids is also supporting the working person to be able to do the work.
Right.
So kind of thinking about value that way.
Yeah. Do you ever help people craft or suggest ways to craft the language in divorce agreements?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Yeah. I'm thinking specifically of this, if you're getting support and you might think one day you're going to repartner.
Right. Well, I think partly it depends on the state you live in and the laws. Like, for instance, in Massachusetts, it really is policy with divorce that if you are cohabitating with somebody, your support ends. And it's very hard to negotiate that any differently in a divorce agreement.
But is the definition fluid of what cohabitation is?
Good question. Good question.
I wonder if, I think I told you I've been trying to talk to some lawyers in this woman's state and in Virginia, and I haven't gotten much of a response. And I don't know whether it's because this is a big deal or because they just don't, they don't have the time to deal with it.
Right.
So I might ask you to think about somebody that you know who might be interested in talking with me generally about the crafting.
Oh, yeah, I'll have somebody. I can think of somebody right now. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. Okay, so I think that's about all I had. Is there anything else that you would like to tell me that you think women in particular should know about the divorce process, whether it's the emotional, the physical, the financial?
Well, I think the main thing that I want people to know is that it is very hard and that it gets better. I oftentimes liken being in the divorce process to having a really, really terrible part-time job.
Oh.
A part-time job where you don't get paid. In fact, you have to pay to do your part-time job. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of stress. You don't get any days off. You have a terrible boss. It's bad coworkers. It's a terrible part-time job. And once you finally sign that agreement, you're able to retire from that particular job and put your energy elsewhere.
Yeah.
So it's hard, and I talk about that a lot in my book, about just the different kind of stages. I developed a new stage model of divorce. I think the old stage model that we were using, the Kubler-Ross death of a loved one stage model for divorce.
Right.
It's not terrible, but it doesn't quite fit. So I developed a new stage model, and that's something I talk a lot about with my clients, of kind of figuring out what you can expect along the way.
I was going to say, this will not be for broadcast or publication before your book comes out, but can you just give me an idea of what it is?
Oh, absolutely. And if you ever want me to come on the podcast, I'm happy to talk about it.
I would love to. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've talked about it and I've published about it, so I'm happy to tell you. So, this happened when I was writing the book, that I got to this chapter where I thought, well, it would be really great to lay out the stages. So I looked at all the research and all the writing about it, and people for the most part were using the Kubler-Ross stages. I'm sure you're familiar with those. And it just didn't quite fit. So I really began to think about my own clients and the hundreds of women I've seen, and then developed this new stage model. And so the first stage is heartbreak. And there's two different kinds of heartbreak. There's the heartbreak that comes when the other person informs you that they want a divorce, right? And that can sometimes be a big surprise and a huge heartbreak. And then there's the heartbreak. We know that 70% of heterosexual divorces are initiated by women. So there's also the heartbreak that comes from being in a marriage where your heart is broken, like little heartbreaks, time after time after time after time, until you finally decide that you can't do it anymore. There's no more heart left to be broken. Basically.
Pre-existing heartbreak.
Yeah, yes. And I think after heartbreak comes the roller coaster stage, and that's where you're
These are good.
all of the feelings, not just a few feelings, but all of the the sadness, the anger, the confusion, the fear, the relief, all of the feelings, and that they come in expected and unexpected ways. And it can feel not like the fun roller coaster, but like that roller coaster of emotions. I think after, and roller coaster, gets exacerbated by the court system, right? Mm-hmm. By all the lawyer visits and everything, which can be very painful and stressful. And then I think after roller coaster comes mending, where you really begin to think about mending your own heart and turn your attention away from your ex and back towards yourself, to figure out what are those things that I need to do for me to make myself feel better. And then I think after mending comes letting go. And of course, like any stage model, nobody goes, starts, ends one stage on a Tuesday and begins the next on a Wednesday. It can be very fluid and people can go back and forth. But I think in the letting go, they're letting go of not only their marriage and their ex, but of certain parts of their identity too, right?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
The identity of being part of an intact family.
And you're letting go of, the way I described it is, because somebody said, oh, you're starting a new chapter. And I was like, no, I'm throwing out the book and writing a whole new book. And it's your, the future that you imagined.
The future, yep. You have to let go of that.
Right. And I think that's the hardest thing, because me personally, I didn't envision a future specifically, but I always thought, okay, I'm going into the future with this person.
Exactly. You knew who the future would be with, even if you didn't know what the future was going to hold. Right. So you have to let go of that. Yeah. And then I think the last stage is moving on, which doesn't mean the divorce is not a part of you. It doesn't mean you forget about the divorce, but it does mean that you're putting your energy into a different direction. You're no longer focusing your energy on your divorce, but you're putting it into a new direction.
Mm-hmm. I know you focus on women. Have you ever thought about opening up a practice for men separately, or is...
I really like working with women. I have a couple of colleagues who have tried to run co-ed groups, and usually what happens is they have all women and maybe one man. So, men need support too. I think they need a different kind of support. But I've always practiced primarily with women, and I really enjoy that work. So. No,
I do think, because I hear a lot of men's groups that are affiliated with churches, and I think that's not necessarily the answer for everyone.
Correct.
Plus, there might be some, I'm projecting, but there might be some guilt associated with, your marriage failed because, the conservative traditional role model. So, I do like your instead of the Kubler-Ross, because those are exactly, I think, what we all experience. So, okay. Is there anything else I need to know?
A million things, but I'm not right now.